Welcome back, or if it's your first time, I'm glad to have you here. I'm Matt Fendora, and you're tuned in to the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, where we journey together toward becoming the best version of ourselves. Using mind, body, heart, and spirit as the anchors of our podcast, join me as we set sail into the depths of self-discovery, unraveling the interconnected layers that shape our growth. If you resonate with today's conversation, consider subscribing to the podcast. Your support means the world to us and ensures you never miss an empowering episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast, your go-to destination for personal growth and empowerment. Whether you're a loyal listener or a newcomer, I'm grateful for your presence. Today, we have the pleasure of chatting with Leroy Slanzi. Leroy has worked in public education for the past 25 years. He was a special education teacher for the first six years of his career before transitioning to his current role as a principal. He has been a principal the past 19 years, including an elementary, middle, and high school principal. He is the author of the book Emotional Schools, The Looming Mental Health Crisis, and a Pathway Through It, as well as the author of the breathing strategy book, And Breathe. Some of Leroy's proudest accomplishments include writing and publishing his books late in life, setting a great example for his kids, but he's most proud of the impact he has made on all of the schools he's worked in. Transforming schools into a place where everyone feels they have a place, students, staff, and parents, is incredibly rewarding. What makes Leroy's heart sing? The excitement in his students' eyes and the passion in his teachers' hearts. Without further ado, here's Leroy. How are you doing today, Leroy?
Good. How's it going, Matt? Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have a firsthand experience in the actual education system, and not just maybe the problems that we're dealing with, but what we're also doing well and how we can transform the students' lives and the teachers' lives moving forward.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have a conversation about it. Do you have kids, Matt, or?
I do. I have three kids. My girls are 8 and 6, and my son just turned 3 last weekend.
Okay, so this will be a meaningful conversation for you, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd love to start off with what inspired you to get into the education system to start with.
It started early for me. When I was, I think, 16, 15, 16, I started lifeguarding and teaching swimming lessons. And I just loved it right off the bat. I loved the coaching aspect. I loved the relationship building. I particularly loved working with little kids because it was just so much fun playing games and being creative and imaginative and just the sparkle in their eye. And so as a teenager, I was hooked, believe it or not. And yeah, the rest was history at that point.
So, what happened after you were lifeguard? Like, what was that transition from going from a lifeguard to special education to principal? What was that transition like?
Yeah, so I ended up lifeguarding and teaching swimming lessons and coaching swim club right through my senior years in high school, and then I took a year off and went back home to Italy to stay with family and work on the farm and get some culture and eat a lot of pasta, which was fantastic. And then I came back and went to school and that's where I got my BA and I did a major in history and a minor in sociology. I wish I would have flipped it. I love sociology. I love sociology is the study of two or more people. And one of the things I've taken from that is when you work with kids is you really have to study kids not just as individuals but in groups because that peer influence is massive. And so I did my undergrad and then I went and did a Bachelor of Elementary Education degree. And while I was in my first few years of teaching, I started my master's in special ed. Simply because my first job, I was placed in a classroom where they put all the vulnerable students, all the at-risk kids, into one class. I mean, we're talking 25, 26 years ago. So streaming was something that they did back then, which may not have been the best way to go about educating kids. However, I embraced it, and that's why I decided I wanted to do a master's in special education because I had a lot of kids that had learning disabilities and whatnot in that class, as well as behavioral issues. And I did that for about 3 years at a middle school, and Once I finished at that middle school, I jumped to a high school and was a special ed teacher in a high school for about 3 years, which was just fascinating. I worked mostly with kids who had learning disabilities or mild intellectual disabilities. And you have to be incredibly creative with kids who have that wiring. Their wiring is not all connected properly in their heads, right? The intelligence is there, but they just can't spit out what they need to. And so, being able to adapt and differentiate instruction to try to get them to maximize, uh, their skill and to show what they know was just fantastic. And yeah, and then I finished that stint off, and that's when I jumped into administration, and I haven't looked back. And I've been an administrator in middle schools, elementary schools, high schools, and now I'm back at an elementary school, and it's been fantastic.
So, when you first saw the work that you were doing in the special education field compared to now, what positive changes have happened?
Well, I think the pedagogy behind special education, like the instructional practices, the way you approach kids, and all of that good knowledge around how they learn, it has grown exponentially. The problem is it's not funded.
Mhm.
Here in Canada and the United States, there's a lot of great ideas and a lot of wonderful things that should be happening for the kids. But if there's not paraprofessionals, like an extra person in a room, if there's no dollars to purchase the right programming or the technology for kids with special needs, you can be the smartest guy in the world and the most compassionate person in the world. Um, it won't help kids the way it should. And so I think the biggest change is we're way more knowledgeable. The downside of it is we've made the changes, we've gained the knowledge, we've learned more, but the funding hasn't caught up with the kids that need the support.
How do we get the funding then? How do we solve that problem?
Well, it's a little different in the United States than it is in Canada, because in the United States, you guys have charter schools, private schools, public schools, and your public schools are funded based on tax base. Whereas in Canada, our kids, regardless of where they live, where they're from, they get a certain set of dollars every year. Like each kid in Canada, I think generates about $9,600. If they're Indigenous, they get an extra 1,000. If they have a special need, depending on what it is. So, for example, if they have autism, there's an extra 26,000 that goes with that goes into the school. So our funding is a bit better up here in terms of what we do with it. The problem is up here is a lot of that money ends up in with middle management at the district level, and it doesn't trickle down to the kids. And in the United States, again, the funding just doesn't show up if the tax base doesn't generate the dollars that's needed for the kids in the school, right? So I think what has to happen is somehow school districts, or I'm not sure what their state education departments, provincial education departments, they have to really take it seriously around the funding aspect, because when you hear special ed, I think a lot of people think kids with Down syndrome or autism or fetal alcohol syndrome, but we're talking about kids who have mental illnesses, mental health issues, whether, and up here we classify them as intensive behavior kids or moderate behavior kids. And on that spectrum, when a kid has an intensive behavior, they could be suffering from depression or bipolar, or an eating disorder, anxiety, mood disorders. And so that's the part that I think the government needs to wake up to, because what happens when you don't support kids with mental illness, um, they get alienated not only by their peers, but they get alienated because they can't cope in class, and then they go down paths that can be quite dangerous. As you know, in the United States, you guys have a lot of. I don't want to dive into that topic too much because it's probably pretty politically charged, but the gun violence and whatnot that happens. I mean, it's happened on occasion here in Canada, but on a much, much smaller scale, because we have different gun laws and whatnot. But you know, there's a real need for the government and districts to understand the funding, and the way that changes is when the politicians decide to make it change, unfortunately. I mean, you can be creative as a school principal. I'm pretty creative with my budget, to try to rob from Peter to pay Paul. But when I do that, sometimes I have to take it out of athletics, or I have to take it out of the science department, or I have to take it out of, out of the shops where we're doing mechanics or metal work, and or the drama department. And so that's the hard part, is you can play a shell game as a principal, but ultimately there just needs to be some direct funding for the special needs. And when I say special needs, I just want to make sure I reiterate that includes mental health, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the important piece there.
So, what are you working on in your school now that you're most proud of?
One thing I'm most proud of is I probably started, what's going on in my school started for me probably 10 to 15 years ago. With the onset of gaming, social media, one of the things that I started to notice first with this infusion of technology was kids being sleep deprived. And it used to be hunger up. I'm not sure what it's like in the States anymore, but in Canada, we've solved the hunger issue in schools because we fund it, we feed kids. Even in the public system, that we have the government has decided, what, there's not going to be a kid who's hungry in our schools. And so we have food for kids. So the next thing that came along was kids who were just up all night gaming or on social media. And what happens is when you have kids who come to school when they're exhausted or sleep deprived, their moods are difficult, their ability to think is diminished, you know, um, their ability to handle stress diminishes. And so, with that comes a whole whack of behaviors that are hard to handle for teachers, right? And the other piece to that sleep deprivation piece is the free and structured play that kids used to do a lot more prior to video games. Kids would be outside in the backyard kicking a soccer ball around and playing hide and seek, doing those activities where they're they're having those interpersonal relationships with friends and family members. And so all of that has just been diminishing in the last 15 years to a point where we are now, where you see teacher burnout is at peak levels all over the world, not just the United States and Canada. I have colleagues in Australia and family in Italy that are in education, and it's everywhere. And so what I'm most proud of is what I've done at my school, because I left the public education system and I moved into an independent school, and the funding is a little bit better. But what I'm most proud of is I don't have a lot of management above me. I have one person who's allowed me to run the school the way I feel like it should be for kids. And I'm proud of the fact that I've incorporated two recesses and a lunch. So our kids get about an hour and 15 minutes of free play uh, every single day. Not to mention, if they get to school at 8, the bell starts at 8:30. They're outside playing or in the gym playing, so that's another half an hour. And on top of that, I use a program called Play is the Way, which is a structured play program that helps kids understand their emotions when they're heightened, and who doesn't get excited when they're playing games, right? So
Mhm.
I'm pretty excited to have a real strong emphasis put back into play in my school, structured and free play, because that's where kids learn to communicate, collaborate, you know, to have develop those conflict resolution skills. And they're not on a gaming system, and they learn to be passionate about play and being creative. Like, it rained here the other day, and it was so awesome to see kids out there trying to, there's a bit of a creek running through the playground, and they were trying to dam it and make puddles. And then they had cars, and you go down you go into the parks and stuff like that. You just don't see the same amount of kids. Or if you drive down the street, you're not seeing kids out on sandcastles with their Tonka trucks being creative. And so it's really diminishing what's happening in our schools. So for me, I'm really happy and proud of the fact that I've been able to bring back a lot of that traditional type stuff that kids need to develop their intellect and their communication skills and all that jazz. So
You mentioned structured play.
yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just quickly. So free play is when kids go outside and and they're like, what do we have to do? It's like, go grab some sticks, go grab some rocks and figure it out, right? And all of a sudden they're building with sticks and rocks and forts, and that's free. That's their imagination running wild. Structured play would be like where you have a prescribed game. So, for example, I could play a game. I play a game called Islands where I set up hula hoops and I yell islands, and the kids have to, four kids have to get into a hoop, and if one kid is left out of the hoop, I'm challenged them. There's a kid left on an island, and we never want that. So it teaches that social emotional piece too, where it's like, hey, don't leave that kid by themselves, bring them in. So it's structured like that, or like volleyball, basketball, track and field, playing from Canada, playing floor hockey, those are all structured activities where they have to, get instruction, they have to abide by rules, and the creativity is a little more contained, but the
Hmm.
collaboration, the teamwork, that stuff is exasperated in a positive way, right?
Hmm. Wow, that's awesome that you put that together because that is something maybe I'm not seeing that. I definitely see a lot of free play, like, hey, it's recess time, go do what you want. But things like that, I think such important lessons in the game that you just said, Island. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's a program that is really huge in Australia and New Zealand, and I was lucky enough to get involved with Plays the Way Australia and have it running here in Canada. I'm hoping to dive into the United States with it a bit too, because there's nothing better than play to get kids to learn, even for
Hmm.
adults, right? When we're smiling and having fun, man, we learn,
Hmm.
right?
So, what inspired you to write your book?
Well, basically everything that I said. So like, it's been progressively getting more and more difficult for teachers. When I first started, it was really focused on reading, writing, arithmetic. You teach your subjects, you teach them how to learn, and then as the years went on, and I'm going back 25 years, so dating myself a bit. As the years went on, as technology became more infused and kids became more sedentary and people started getting more behind screens, kids were less able to regulate their feelings and their emotions, right? And because of that, the behavior in our classrooms started to grow in a negative way. And on top of that, I don't want to point fingers at just kids here. As technology came into our lives, it also came into adults' lives. Like our cell phones, right? Like our cell
Mm.
phones are attached to a lot of our hands. And a big part of the problem is that parents are engaged on their phone instead of being engaged with their kids. And right there, that attachment and that communication that should be happening between father and son, father and daughter, mother and daughter is diminished. You even
Hmm.
see it. I've even seen that the language development, having kids show up in kindergarten and their language is delayed compared to what it used to be because the verbal oral communication is not happening near as much as it should, right? And as the years have transpired, you know, parents' means for dealing with kids is a lot of times putting an iPad in front of their face, or hey, you know what, get out of my hair, go gaming because I've got this to do, and back when I was young, it was the television was the evil devil, right?
Hmm.
Oh, you use the TV to babysit your kids, and now it's just switched to technology, and so because parents have also become, because with technology, whether you're gaming or you're on social media, every time there's a notification that somebody likes one of your posts or you get it rewarded, it's a dopamine hit. Your brain releases that dopamine, and that's addictive.
Hmm.
They've said that video games are more addictive than cocaine in terms of how much dopamine, because it's like you're being rewarded every 5 seconds, right? So now you take that where you get these kids who are used to this dopamine rush from playing video games or whatnot, and then you put them in a desk and you say, hey, here's a math problem. Let's get at her. Well, 1 minute into it, nobody's given them a dopamine hit. So now
Hmm.
you can imagine they're not getting that reward from that piece of paper, that math problem in front of them, and all of a sudden it's more difficult for them. And then you combine that with the fact that the free play and structured play and the interaction between the parents, or their communication skills, their ability to handle stress, all those self-regulation pieces are leaving. So when they get to something that's difficult, they can't handle the stress, and then boom, we're seeing an explosion of behavior. So what you're finding in schools, and like I said, from 25 years ago to the point we're at now, is we're just seeing this environment where 30 to 40% of classrooms, we're dealing with 30 to 40% of the kids in a classroom are having difficulties with their behavior and their emotions. And what used to be, 5% of the kids in a classroom is now 30, 40%, because there's still 50, 60% of parents doing a wonderful job. Kids are developed, there's still a lot of great kids. But when you have a class of 26 kids and 8 of them are swinging off the chandelier like they're monkeys, that's disruptive and you can't teach. You're constantly putting out fires, and that steals you away from that instructional time, right? So
Mhm.
I wrote this book because I believe that we are now in a position as schools, and hopefully parents will start getting the message more and more. We have to incorporate that social emotional learning piece into our what we do right in kindergarten to teach kids how to cope with those stressors, because they're not learning it before they get to school. They're not learning it after school as much. We have to teach the kids who are doing great, those 40, 50% of kids. We have to teach them how to handle those kids who are struggling, because they'll suck them in, right? Because you'll have 30% of the kids who are struggling. Then you have a bunch of fence sitters can either go over to this way, or if something feels pretty awesome, they're going to go over this way. Now you got 50% of the kids who are off, right? And
Mhm.
so that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because first I wanted to identify what's causing the issues in schools, and then provide a pathway for schools and teachers and parents to meander through it so we can get things back on track, or at least do our best to try to balance things out a little bit. And hopefully that same with my breathing, the book that I wrote about breathing strategies, because if you get into the neuroscience around emotions, it's all tied to that the polyvagal nerve, which is goes in and it's attached to your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex and all of that sciencey stuff there. But that breathing is what calms that vagal tone, which then affects your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala. That's what affects it, right? And so uh, the goal with my book and the other book, and I'm writing a few more books as a matter of fact, is to have that mindfulness, that meditation, that breathing stuff come back in. So when kids are feeling stressed, the first thing we start with is let's take some deep breaths, let's chill out, so we can get to figuring out how we can master our emotions and move through this difficult situation, right?
Mhm. So is that something you guys are implementing in your schools now, the breath work?
Yeah, 100%. So I don't, there's not a kid, and I did it. I've been doing this now for probably the last 10 years. I've implemented a social emotional learning program and the previous element. So I'm in an elementary school now. Prior to this, I was in a high school for 5 years, and prior to that, I was in an elementary school for 6 years. So the elementary school prior to that is when I was introduced to Play is the Way, which is all social emotional learning, mindfulness, breathing through play. And so I implemented it about 10 years ago, and it worked unbelievably. Discipline went down, behavior went down, perseverance and rigor went up. And then I got to the high school, and believe it or not, I implemented it in the high school. I just had to get high school teachers to realize, what, you have 5 minutes in your class to play a game to get kids to work on breathing strategies and whatnot. Because as adults, I mean, and I'm sure, based on your program, you've had plenty of conversations with people about about mindfulness, about breathing, about muscle relaxation strategies, about all of the neuroscience and whatnot. And it's easy to convince high school kids that they need to learn how to calm and soothe. And a lot of high school kids, you know, they're wonderful because they're already looking into meditation. Like high school kids, once they get past grade 8, 9, and 10, where they're crazy. But once they get to grade 11 and 12, you have 16, 17, 18-year-old kids who want to learn how to meditate. They want to know about mindfulness because they're starting to go down that path, and they've realized that life is this ups and downs, right? Whereas
Hmm.
8, 9s, and 10s, they just think life is this and everything is unfair, and the worst thing's going to happen to them forever. You'll find out once your kids get to 13, 14, it'll be wonderful for you. Mine are just getting through. So I survived. But yeah.
So you talk about in your book a pathway that schools can take moving forward. Is that pathway the breath work and the mindfulness?
No, well, the pathway first and foremost, most is that the first thing that I ask teachers to understand is I get them to understand, or I want them to be on the same page. Like they need to have the same value system around understanding that our schools, our classrooms are emotional. Once teachers know that, then it's about getting them to understand the science behind the emotions. It's like, yes, our schools are emotional. It's like, here's what we need to do. but I'm going to tell you why we need to do it from a science perspective. So I basically talk about emotional regulation. Then I get into the polyvagal response and I talk about the science and I explain to them. And it's easy because every single time I go and I do a workshop or professional development for a teacher, you show up and I guarantee you 30 of the teachers that are sitting there out of 40 had something happen to them in the morning that just made their, whether it was they spilt their coffee on the way out or stubbed their toe or couldn't find their keys or got a flat, they're having an emotional response. And so I use the science to explain to them that every single human being has an emotional response to their environment the moment they wake up. Like you wake up and your floor is cold and you put your feet on that, your body reacts emotionally. It's like, oh, that's cold. I don't like the cold. Or, oh, that's cold. I love the cold. And it can change your mood instantaneously, right? And so when I get them to understand the science of emotions, then I bring them into the place of, around why it is important for us to be able to calm our emotions and become the master of our feelings. And then once I get them to understand that, and I have to explain to them that doesn't mean I don't want kids to have feelings or adults to have feelings. It's just that we want people to get to a place where they're calm enough to go, okay, this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling shame. And then what I do in my book is I teach teachers and I teach parents and I teach kids about the family of emotions. There's not a kid in my school who couldn't sit down. If you sat down with a grade 5 kid and you said, hey, can you tell me what anger is? They'll tell you right now. And if you say, hey, can you tell me what embarrassment is? They'll give you a clinical understanding. And it's important they know that because the moment they understand that emotion, and once they calm themselves, they can say, okay, anger usually leads to me or people doing something aggressive. So I'm going to take some deep breaths and I'm going to calm down because I don't want to throw my pencil across the room. I don't want to run out of the classroom and slam the door. I don't want to tell my teacher off, and so once I get teachers to understand the science behind the emotions, then I bring it in and I implement the social emotional learning program from that same perspective, from the perspective of what it would be like from an adult, because it's no different for an adult than it is for a kid. A kid they might cry over spilt milk, but an adult's going to cry over something else. And if they can understand that scope and sequence and the age appropriateness of our emotions, then it's an easy sell. And then once you get into that situation, and get them where everybody's valuing the same thing, then you bring them to the place of, okay, let's structure our school in a way that we can implement this social emotional learning program so it embeds into English, math, science, socials, art, phys ed. And because the worst thing you can do is do to a teacher, say, here, I'm going to add this to your plate. You need to teach this on top of all this. So I try to teach them to bring it all together. So the moment teachers feel their classes are getting a bit boisterous or emotional, it's like at that moment, that's when you get to say, hey, stop, put your hand over your heart. Let's do some heart breathing. Feel your heartbeat. And you do that for about a minute. It's like, hey, you guys good? You feel a little more calm? Awesome. Let's get back to our poetry assignment. Boom, right there. And it becomes embedded in it. It's just having those mindful strategies and going on throughout the whole time. But I use play, free and structured play, to teach the breathing strategies. Like in this book of mine right here, if you can see that, it's got 50 strategies. So it's in here. There's like there's rainbow breathing, there's lion breathing, there's just alligator breathing, there's snake breathing, which is fun for kids. And ultimately, every breathing strategy is the same thing. Deep breath in, deep breath out, right? The Navy SEALs do it. They have I think, a 5-finger breathing routine Navy SEALs use, right? The difference is we teach kids with animation and so we play a game. I raise their emotions and then I teach them to breathe. And then we just incorporate that into what we do. And so when kids are melting down in class, it's like, they know it's like, hey, are you in control? Are you the master of your emotions or the victim right now? And we teach them what it means to be a victim, right? And what it means to be a master. And they can say, oh, I'm being a victim. It's like, okay, what do you need to do? I need to alligator breathe. And they'll alligator breathe. They calm down. Once they calm, then we can work through that problem together if they need to be separated from the class, or we do it as a whole class. And then you move forward and it just becomes embedded into everything you do. And our kids, when they learn to soothe them, when they learn to calm, and their thinking becomes the paramount characteristic that they have, they can stop and go, ooh, I am angry, I shouldn't kick my friend, or I shouldn't break his snowman, or I shouldn't, and it allow, when kids can think, they will do the right thing. When they can't and they're emotional, as you see in schools often, they'll do the wrong thing. And unfortunately, a lot of times too, doing the wrong thing sometimes feels good. If somebody punches me and I punch him back, that feels good. It's the
Mhm.
wrong thing to do, but man, it felt good in the moment. And we try to get them to calm so they don't do the wrong thing, and they constantly do the right thing. And I got to tell you, the schools that I've been in and we incorporate this program, our test results, our academics have gone up because we have kids who are not stressed, not as stressed in class, and they can persevere and they have the grit and resiliency to work through it because they can soothe.
That's so awesome. So how do we take that system and implement it in other schools?
They call me and I come in and I teach them how to do it. That's why I wrote the book. The key is that they do have to bring somebody in that can teach them how to structure their school, because you can't run a social emotional learning program all willy-nilly. You can't have one teacher doing it and another one not doing it. And you have to have, this cohesive unit where your schedule is organized and structured, and the principal is leading that charge. Like, I have an assembly every Monday where I play a game and I do a breathing strategy every Monday morning, and then they go to class, and then I send out an email to teachers like, okay, we did alligator breathing, make sure you're reinforcing that in your classrooms, right?
Mm.
And so I've structured my schedule, I've organized it, I've given the teachers the professional development that they need, because teachers need professional development around this. Because you could do it, you can talk about breathing, you can talk about those things, but if you don't know how to embed it into your curriculum, it's going to feel like extra work. Even though right now, because of the way behavior is, you are putting in extra work because you're putting out fires all day, right? So
Mhm.
it's one of those things where it has to be structured, organized, and the only cost really is to bring in an expert to kind of do it. That's what you front load it, and then after that, the teachers can just take off with.
So is it the principal's responsibility to implement all these changes?
Well, essentially what happens, and this is one place where I'm a firm believer in the trenches. I think a lot of times principals and district have to be careful, because when you come down from the top with an idea, teachers are going to feel like, oh, they're putting more on my plate. And so one of the things that I do as a principal is I use school data. I use what's happening in the school as evidence to say, hey, you guys, this is what's going on in our school. We need to fix this. What do you think? And then we'll start brainstorming, and that's when I start planting seeds around, hey, here's this, here's that, here's the other. The other piece is I lead by example. And like I said with the assembly, when a kid is melting down, I'm not one of those principals who, you know, will leave a kid in the class melting down. I pull that kid out, but when I pull that kid out, guess what I'm doing with them? I'm doing breathe work with them. Like, I actually don't even have an office. The space I have is called the calming space. And I've got tables and couches and I got everything. And so it's just an open door. So even now when kids are struggling in class with something, they're allowed to say to a teacher, hey, I need to calm. Can I go to the calming space? And they'll walk in and I don't say a word to them. They'll go right on the couch and they'll sit there. Sometimes they're melting down and they're throwing things but after about 10 minutes, all of a sudden they're calm and it's like, hey, how you doing, bud? You want to come sit down and have a conversation? Yeah, I'm ready. It's like, awesome. Right. And it's so, as a principal, you can't say go dig a hole without grabbing a shovel. And I think once you do that, then and that's for any leader. If you're going to lead, you better be willing to get your hands dirty with your staff if you want them to follow you through the trenches, right? And I think the first thing is to recognize that teachers, their jobs right now are tough. They're tough, and that's why they're leaving the profession the way they are, right? So, yeah.
How do we inspire more people to get involved in the education system and taking care of the kids?
Well, the hard part is uh, the reputation of working in the school system is taking a real hit, right? You're hearing more and more of these horror stories of the behavior. In the United States, they don't pay teachers well at all down there, which is just baffling to me. Our teachers get paid pretty good up here, and on top of it, I think a lot of teachers that are leaving the profession are not talking kindly about the profession because they've had a bad experience. They have a bad experience with school districts and governments not funding it and whatnot. So, I mean, it has to start. I think you're going to have people like me who just are going to naturally love teaching and want to work with kids and want to make a difference. But even myself, I had to leave the school district about 2 years ago to go to the school I'm at now because I just had enough with the politics. It was every time I tried to
Mm-hmm.
think outside the box or move forward, it was roadblock. And it wasn't even money. It was just mindset, right? They hadn't been in the superintendent and other people hadn't been in the classroom in 15 years. And so they didn't know, they didn't believe you with what's going on in the classroom, right? So and I know there's a lot of superintendents who get in there. They're in schools, they're in classroom, they see it, they feel it, they talk to parents, and the other thing is that parents bash teachers repeatedly, right? Because we're in this era where helicopter parenting is and lawnmower parenting is kind of taken over, and parents don't like to see their kids uncomfortable at all. And so whenever a teacher is providing any kind of constructive criticism or some teaching to their kids, and if their kids get upset with it because they can't handle, you know, the difficulty of it because of, their lack of ability to deal with stress, parents are going off the handle and they're blaming the teacher, you're this. And so there's this whole culture around, how negative it is to be in the classroom and whatnot. And I think it's getting harder and harder, even up here. Like I know in a lot of states down there, you can't get teachers to fill jobs. It's the same thing up here. We're struggling to get teachers to fill jobs, and we pay well, right? And it's because people just they don't want to deal with the stress of it.
Mm-hmm. Do the kids have a favorite breathing exercise?
You know what? I said heart breathing because with my kids, they love to feel their heart beating. And we actually right now it's even taken off even more because we had an incubator with eggs in it, and we just hatched a bunch of chicks in there. And so it's like, because I introduced heart breathing, it's like pretend it's your mom. Your mom's got her hand on your heart and she can feel your heartbeat. And it's like now they all think they're moms because they got these little chicklets running around. But it all depends, with the boys, anytime they can, like, they like the lion one because they can roar really loud, because that's how you exhale with a roar, right?
Oh,
And so it all depends on, some kids like the snake breathing, like to make the hissing sound. And but yeah, it all depends on the kids. Usually it's, gender wise, boys typically like the more aggressive masculine type stuff, and the girls like the rainbow breathing. And then there's a bunch in the middle where they just kind of like whatever picture looks best or whatever is more colorful. And yeah, it's pretty cool.
that's so awesome.
Yeah.
So now we're getting to the end of the podcast. And so what I do at the end is I ask three questions, which I ask all guests. And these are over the topics of what this podcast is, which is live, love, and grow. So the first question I have is, what advice can you share about how to create a life that leaves a positive impact on the world?
I think the most important thing is that we need people, parents, even if you don't have kids, if you're an uncle or an aunt and your brother or sister has kids, is we need to reestablish attachment. We need to reestablish relationships. And if unfortunately, we live in an era where, our moms aren't at home, they're having to work because the economy dictates both parents have to work. And, back in our day, our mom was always there. So we had that attachment, and we had no video games, but I think if parents and family members or community members can put their phones down and be a little more uh, involved, and they connect with kids and they form relationships, you're going to have a bunch of kids growing up into adults who are empathetic, kind, compassionate, they're intrinsically motivated, good character. And if we don't, guess where our kids are going to learn their character traits from,
Hmm.
right? They're going to learn. And I don't want to, I love technology in terms of education. Like cell phones are banned in my school, but I do have iPads, and we have a lot of reading programs on there. Kids are making videos. We've even introduced AI. So there's a lot of great things that technology brings. But if it's not structured, if it's not organized, and if people can't put their phones down at the dinner table or on a Sunday morning to go out and kick the ball with their kid, or pass the baseball around or play hide and seek, then we're going to have a bunch of kids growing up who are going to be a menace to society. I hate to say it, that's kind of a strong word, but the more we're involved, the more beautiful our children are going to grow up and be amazing, amazing human beings. And that's the most important thing.
Mhm. The second question I have is, what are some practical ways people can cultivate self-love?
I think the best thing, and so I don't know if so I work in an indigenous school here, uh, you, with indigenous people, and one of the things that I've learned at the school is Mother Earth is a big deal. I'm not a religious person, but the spirituality that comes with them saying, "Hey, we're going outside, but stop. You need to take your shoes and socks off." It's like, "Oh, why am I taking my shoes and socks off?" So you can feel Mother Earth on your feet. In the moment, you know what that feeling is to walk in grass in your bare feet? Doesn't it make you feel amazing? And so there's a lot of things that Indigenous people do. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and it used to be "Please rise," and all these structured things. Well, with Indigenous people, when they drum and they sing, they want you to sit. And it's like, well, people, a lot of people go, "Isn't that disrespectful?" And it's like, well, no, it's not, because you're getting closer to Mother Earth. You're getting closer to the ground. You can
Mm.
feel the vibrations in the ground, and you can feel the vibrations coming through your body. And it's all about that connectivity piece. And I think, if people want to develop that self-love, and again, like I said, I'm not a religious person, but one thing I have learned is that the more I am outside breathing fresh air, the more I am, for me, if I don't go for a hike, I don't feel as good as I would if I sat on the couch watching TV. If I don't have a conversation with my kids, when they do talk to me because they're teenagers, like I don't feel as good. And I think it's that connection to earth, connection to air, connection to your family. The moment you do those things, you're going to just inherently feel this natural glow, and you won't need a glass of wine, or you won't need a cup of coffee. You won't need those things to make you feel good about yourself, right? And I also strongly urge to people, if something is not right or doesn't feel good, if your job is just beating you up, leave it. I wished I would have did it earlier, but go find something and I know money comes into play, so it's not that simple. But
Mhm.
you know what? You don't have to sit there and beat yourself up day in and day out and work for people who don't respect or value you. And you need to leave that any kind of toxicity, leave it alone and step away from it, and find that that peaceful place, and you'll end up loving yourself more than you think.
Mm. That's beautiful.
Thanks.
The third and final question I have is, what is one actionable tip someone can do today to grow 1% better?
This is going to sound redundant, but put your phone down and go do something. Put your phone down. Put your phone on airplane mode. And I know, because I have two, like like I have an ex-wife, so my kids right now are this weekend they're with their mom, and it's hard for me to shut my phone off just in case there's an emergency, right? But what I
Mhm.
do is I just make sure, when I do go for a hike, I don't even put AirPods in and listen to music. My phone is in my back pocket just in case, but I don't take it out even to take a picture. And
Mm.
I just strongly say, put your phone down, shut your TV off, and be present. You've heard it. Stop and smell the roses.
Yeah.
Literally stop and smell the roses. So many times because I go down to San Francisco every year to watch a 49ers game, and I just laugh how many people are recording the game and they're at it. And I'm just like, I get it that you want to save the memory, but you really don't have to, because it'll show up on the NFL Network if you really want to see it. But it's like, be present with the aura of the stadium, and just be
Yeah.
the smells, and be just and I think that's the biggest thing. If people could just stop and smell the roses and be present, and they have to do it by starting to put this down like we did before these things, when we had the rotary phones, right? Like
Yeah.
back then, right? That's what I think that's probably the best thing people can do. And it's one of the things, the changes that I've had to make late in life. And I wished I would have taken that advice a little bit earlier, but I didn't, because I was caught up with, I need to get my pension. I need to pay for kids' school. And it's now that I'm kind of getting up there and my kids are off to college and stuff, I'm like, wow, you know what? It's time that I started to think about me again. And that would be my suggestion. And it's like Mother Earth, man. It's the real
Mhm.
deal.
How can people connect with you?
They can connect with me. They can email me at leroyslanzi@gmail.com. They can go to my website, leroyslanzi.com. I have a website called playistheway.ca as well. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm on all of them. I'm on all the. Here I am preaching social media is the devil, and meanwhile, I'm all of them. But it's all moderation, right? So yeah, they can get a hold of me, and Leroy Slanzi is a pretty unique name. If you Google it, I don't think there's another one out there. So yeah, but they can get a hold of me through my website or just email me at leroyslanzi@gmail.com.
Mhm. How can the audience support you on your journey?
You know what? Buy my book, suggest it to teachers. Buy the breathing book. The breathing book is one I just took me about 20 or 30 hours and I did for fun.
Mhm.
And it's doing very well. But the more parents soothe with their kids, the more they're going to soothe. And I think if parents and teachers listen to this, it's time to start learning how to have a symbiotic relationship between social emotional learning and curriculum, and it can be embedded. It's not one on top of the other, making it harder for you to work. And I think that's what that's how they can support me, is by moving forward with this emotional well-being revolution, so to speak.
Mhm.
Start worrying about emotions.
Mhm. Well, Leroy, it's really great having you on. I mean, I love everything that you're working on now, and I hope that it spreads outside of the- just everywhere because it's such an important thing and what you're doing. It's an important mission, and the kids, the adults, everybody needs this type of work in their life. And I'm want to acknowledge you for that and thank you for coming on here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Awesome, Matt. You know what? And you know how you asked me those things that I'm quite proud of. I saw the look in your eyes every time. I've done quite a few podcasts, and usually the presenters have kids, and I
Mhm.
can see the curiosity in all the presenters' eyes, because it's like, oh wow, I have kids. Oh, this makes sense. This makes sense. This makes sense. And I saw the same for you. So you made me feel good, brother. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Choose to Live, Love, and Grow podcast. I hope you took something away from this episode that you can implement today just like I did. I'd love to know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode. Let me know by sharing this episode in your Instagram stories and tag me at Matt Fendora. If you've enjoyed this episode, the ones before, and or you're looking forward to future episodes, please hit that subscribe or follow button. It helps me get this information to even more people. No matter what you choose to do, choose to live, love, and grow. Thank you, and have an outstanding day.